Dr. Victoria Cox is a PhD research student at the Menzies School of Health Research and Royal Darwin Hospital. She graduated from medical school with first-class honours. She read for a Master's in Philosophy in Evidence-Based Social Intervention and Policy Evaluation at the University of Oxford as a General Sir John Monash Scholar. Dr. Cox is a principal investigator working on a collaborative project to eliminate the burden of scabies in Indigenous communities and is considering the impact of mass drug administration treatment programs in Northern Australia. Incredibly impressive woman, bringing the science in STEAM today. Please welcome Dr. Victoria Cox.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Victoria Cox, and it's an incredible privilege to be here, not just today, but somehow as the first speaker as well. I'd like to start this presentation by recognising the Minister, distinguished guests, but also recognising that this is Larrakia land and recognising the Larrakia elders past, present and emerging. I'm going to talk a little bit about skin disease today, but don't worry, not too much, and I've got lots of pictures to try and keep us entertained as the first presentation for this morning. And I just wanted to start this presentation by stating that the theme is going to be open, be brave, and be brilliant, but of course with a science focus. So to start this presentation, who am I? Well, unfortunately, I'm not a born and bred Territorian. I've been here for about 4 years. I grew up in Adelaide and had a bit of a hiatus in the UK when I was given the opportunity to study at Oxford with a focus on public health and social policy after being awarded a General Sir John Monash Scholarship. But I am pleased to report that Darwin and the Territory is my home, and the recurring theme throughout this presentation is that I have immense belief in the Australian healthcare system, but specifically in Territory healthcare, and I continue to be amazed by the wonderful culture and opportunities for improving healthcare on this great land. And there's three things that I'd really like to focus on throughout this presentation, and that is that everything happens for a reason, first of all. Second of all, that life can be really challenging sometimes, and I guess myself as an individual, I try as much as possible to embrace the challenging times. And finally, that you can achieve anything you want to, and I really believe this specifically as someone who works within the Australian healthcare system, but again, someone who's very passionate about Territory healthcare. So this is a little bit about my initial journey. On the right, this is my graduation photo from the University of Adelaide. I don't think I've ever looked that glamorous in my life since. On the top left, I'm quite a keen sportswoman. You'll see later in my presentation that I swim, but I have tried my hand at running from time to time. This is in Busselton, some of you will be aware. And on the bottom left, particularly in my early days, I embraced the Duke of Edinburgh Award. And even though this is now 10, 15 years ago, this is really a core central theme of my first component of the presentation, which is be open. And I think for me, the Duke of Edinburgh was one of these initial opportunities where I was really embraced to try lots of different things and pursue and find my passions, which ultimately has led me to here. On the left, here's a picture of me playing the violin. I'm actually a classically trained violinist, but somehow got my hands on an electric violin for this performance. And on the bottom right, this is a picture of me. I don't think I make this damper, I think someone gave it to me, but being involved with the Operation Flinders Foundation in South Australia, which some of you may know is a program for at-risk youth and takes high school students into the Flinders Ranges for two-week-long journeys at a time to focus on embracing mentorship and leadership in at-risk youth. And just finally, so the picture on the bottom right, that's on a station somewhere in the Flinders Ranges. on the left, I don't know where there's another picture of me running, but, and on the top right is just a picture from my early surf lifesaving days. And the purpose of me showing all these photos is to segue to this picture. And if you'd said to me 5, 10 years ago that I would end up here today in the Northern Territory, seeing myself as a hopefully prospective long-term Territorian, I never would have believed you. I just never would have believed you. And I knew from a really early age that I had an interest in public health. I was interested in Indigenous affairs as much as someone who grew up in Adelaide and, to be quite frank, had a very privileged upbringing. And I knew that I wanted or needed the opportunity to study overseas in order to really work towards having a lasting impact and creating change in the Australian healthcare system. But if you told me that I would be standing on a stage amongst one of the most distinguished healthcare researchers and clinicians, that's Professor Bart Curry, and this picture in the middle on the bottom is actually from my PhD oral presentation last Friday, I never would have believed you to have the ability to work alongside and learn from someone who in the future will be regarded as one of the greatest clinicians that has ever lived and worked in the Northern Territory. To be able to run a skin clinic in Maningrida with my sister, which is the picture on the right, having brought her over from Brisbane, again, I never would have believed you. And the top left presentation is a picture of me presenting at the World Health Organization, talking about the importance of skincare in Northern Australia. Again, I definitely wouldn't have believed you with that one. And these are just some of the most, I guess, important moments for me, even just within the last couple of months. And even when starting my PhD journey a couple of years ago, and thinking about who I am as a scientist working in the Northern Territory and in the Australian healthcare system, and I wouldn't have even believed you a couple of years ago. And I think in these moments, it's important for us to be proud of the progress and again to focus on life is about the journey and not the destination. And I think particularly for me, being one of only a couple of Australians to be even invited to speak at the World Health Organization, that was a really big pinch me moment. So everything happens for a reason. I have no idea really why I'm standing here today and I never could have looked forward and created actually, I couldn't have tried to create where I've ended up if I tried, but what I know is that it's really important to believe in yourself and really important to believe yourself on your journey and really to back yourself, because ultimately, if you don't believe that you can end up at the World Health Organization speaking about skin disease in the Northern Territory, you'll never get there. And I'm very fortunate that I've had some mentors and wonderful supervisors who've guided me on my journey. But again, I think that sometimes it's hardest to develop the strength and courage and conviction from within. And I think particularly as a young female, that can be really difficult. And it's something that I continue to work on every day of my life. Oops, sorry. So now we're moving on to be brave. And this is a picture, these are a couple of pictures of me swimming. This is in 2017. And when I was studying at Oxford, I had this idea that I would become a channel swimmer. And I worked really hard at it. And I, many years ago, was a pool swimmer, but I'd never really swum in the ocean before, and actually swimming in the ocean was quite terrifying for me, if I was to be completely honest. And so the idea of swimming 3 of the biggest open water channel swims in the world within 2 months and 2 days, again, was pretty unbelievable. But anyway, this is where we got to. So on the top left, this is me dodging I think it was a Norwegian warship, somewhere in the English Channel between England and France, which some of you may know is a 34-kilometre swim, direct distance, but you end up swimming somewhere between 40 and 50 kilometres. Took me 12 hours, and is, again, probably my proudest sporting achievement to date. On the right, this is me swimming around Manhattan Island, and I've picked this picture because it's actually a picture of the UN, some of you might recognise. And on the bottom right, I just really liked that picture because the Australian flag with my paddler. And on the left, on the bottom left, this is just a really nice picture of the Manhattan skyline, actually. And the third swim that I did was the Catalina Channel swim from Santa Catalina Island to mainland LA. And yes, as I mentioned before, these three swims together were what we collectively call the Triple Crown of open water swimming. And so it's really easy for me to stand up here and talk about this really great achievement. But the truth is that when I swam the Catalina Channel swim, I was expected to swim it in probably 10 or 11 hours. And I am a pretty good open water swimmer. But I remember, so you start the swim at 11 p.m. And so, of course, there's this thing in channel swimming where you don't tell your swimmer how long they've been swimming for because they get really disillusioned and they just pull the pin and they get out. But the problem was, it was daybreak. And so I knew exactly how long I'd been swimming for. And so at about 6 or 7 a.m., I said to them, oh, how am I going? And they said, yeah, you're doing amazingly well. I said, yeah, but like, where am I? How am I going? And they said, you're doing amazingly well. And I said, yeah, but like, where am I? I can't see land, I can't see anything. And they said, yeah, you're doing amazingly well, but I reckon we're probably about halfway there. And I said, right, okay, so I've been swimming for maybe 6-7 hours and I'm halfway there. Okay, this is not going so well. And so I think in that moment you have a choice to either keep on swimming, just as Dory would say, or you pull the pin and you get out. And I very much in my life aspire and try to be the former. Not always, but very much you make the decision to keep going. And I think that was my first of these 3 big swims and was really testing for me, both emotionally but particularly physically, and also because I knew I had 2 more big swims to go. So that was my challenge for swim 1. My challenge for swim 2, which was the English Channel swim, was that I was under an immense amount of pressure to do this swim. My parents had flown from Australia to be with me for my English Channel swim. My parents had literally never even been overseas before. So they'd come over to England, both of my parents. My dad was on the boat. There was this amazing story where he'd actually had a kidney stone and ended up in Guy's Hospital the night before the swim, and then had self-discharged from hospital, caught a train to Dover and got on the boat. But we won't talk more about that. And I think because the English Channel is one of the biggest, or it's regarded as the equivalent of climbing Mount Everest, there was an enormous amount of pressure on me to make it. And then in the final swim, I had a panic attack somewhere coming down the Hudson River. And again, I can't really explain this aside from we thought what had happened is that I don't think we'd got my feeding right, and so I was really undernourished, which those of you who do endurance events will know is one of the biggest challenges in making it through a 10, 12, 14, 16 hour event, be that running, swimming, mountain climbing, whatever. And so they'd said, do you want some lollies? And I said, yeah, I'll have some lollies. And they'd beautifully cut up these snakes for me to like pick which colour lolly snake I wanted. But I didn't do that. I literally picked up the entire thing of lollies and stuffed them in my mouth. And I think what had happened is I had this big sugar rush, and then I just crashed somewhere in the Hudson River and had a panic attack. And so again, in these moments, you have to find it within yourself to be brave and keep going. And for me, in that moment, well, I wouldn't say swimming down the Hudson River, I'd say floating on my back when the boat had actually physically driven away from me so I couldn't climb into the boat and disqualify myself from the swim. I think it's so easy for me to stand up here and, suggest like that these things have happened, but there's always a lot that goes on behind the scenes. And I think in these sometimes it's really difficult to talk about being brave in these moments and having a panic attack as you're swimming down the Hudson River, which is really, truly unbelievable for someone who has done as much open water swimming as myself. But I think there's often so much more that goes into these moments. And again, I try as much as possible to embrace this as opposed to something that lets me become fearful. So yes, and these moments can be really challenging. And my final point is to not be afraid to be brilliant. I'm just humour me here. I'm just going to talk about skin disease for a couple of minutes, which is my one true love and my ultimate passion. So my PhD through the Menzies School of Health Research is on tropical skin disease, and I have been incredibly fortunate to have been supported to run the first formal prevalence assessment, which is looking at the prevalence of scabies and different skin diseases in a remote Aboriginal community for the first time in over a decade, which has enormous implications for both the Australian healthcare system and obviously for territory healthcare as well, because my hope is that continuing to talk about the prevalence of skin disease and how important it is for people in the territory and for territory healthcare, that we can continue to advocate for the logistics and the resources to develop and implement a tailored and targeted public health response. So skin disease is really important. Globally, it's really important, but it's also important in Northern Australia. Some of you may be surprised to note that skin disease is one of, if not the most common cause for presentation to a primary healthcare centre in Northern Australia. And this is research that's come out of the Northern Territory and Western Australia. And on the top right, you can see a picture of a foot that has scabies. And this is just a very visual representation of the fact that despite there being so much skin disease in the NT, the burden of skin disease is underreported and underrepresented on the national policy agenda. And the normalisation of skin disease, that is, the acceptability of skin disease, continues to be an ongoing problem. And this is a particular problem in the Northern Territory. So scabies, which is one of the 20 neglected tropical diseases officially recognised by the World Health Organization, is reported to have the highest burden, some of the highest burden of scabies in regions is reportedly in Northern Australia. And the primary burden of disease, again, looks a little bit like these pictures on the screen, which I've used with permission through Menzies. And we know that scabies particularly affects young children and stops little kids from sleeping and stops little kids from going to school. And if we want to talk about the social determinants of health, it starts here. But there are also secondary complications as well, and some of you potentially would have also heard of conditions such as post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, acute rheumatic fever, rheumatic heart disease. It's all linked, it's all together in the same cycle, and it's all important. So if we want to talk about addressing or reducing the burden of kidney disease and heart disease, we also need to talk about the skin. And just a little bit on crusted scabies, just more so for your awareness, there's a chronic condition called crusted scabies, which is most often caused by an overwhelming of the host immune response in a susceptible individual, and you can get this crusting and flaking of the skin, which is highly contagious. And this is just a picture of my study team from working in Maningrida on the bottom right of the screen. We ran a healthy skin week, which was a lot more than a week. Probably about 18 months of planning and preparation. And I just must say how privileged I felt to be a part of the program, and making sure that the program was not just a research program, but also one which was locally developed and locally implemented by the Aboriginal Medical Service, the Malala Health Service, and also being welcomed onto Gunabidji land by key community members and local healthcare workers. And this is just our poster on the bottom left. And just something that I'm particularly proud of because I'm doing science. So this was a recent submission to what we call the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme, the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, which regulates the PBS, which some of you will know is the medicines body that governs in Australia. And we wanted ivermectin to be listed as a first-line treatment for the management of scabies. And some of you might have heard a lot about ivermectin in the context of COVID. It is an anti-parasitic, not an antiviral agent. But we knew that there was an enormous opportunity to improve health outcomes in Northern Australia through promoting a more appropriate medication which reduces inequity and barriers to access for people living in remote Aboriginal communities. And after about 9 or 10 months of writing this submission, ivermectin became a first-line treatment agent for the management of scabies on the 1st of April last year. And this is something that it will take many, potentially years, if not decades, to see the impact. But I really hope has been a really tangible contribution that I've been able to make on the basis of my scientific work through the Menzies School of Health Research, which will have a significant impact, positive impact on the Australian healthcare system. Oh. So I think this really just comes back to you really can do anything. With a lot of hard work, being open to the opportunities that come your way, being brave, and really believing yourself, surrounding yourself with good people. So the question is not who am I, but who are you? And you can see why I'm doing the scientific component of this presentation and not the cultural or artistic. But I've just taken the liberty of throwing up some pictures which I found off Google. I don't think it really matters what you do. I think whether you pick from STEAM, whether you've existed within one of these sectors for your entire life, whether you have a new idea, whether you want to collaborate with someone from a different sector, whether you want to go back to undertake further study, whether you just want to volunteer with an organisation, I think that we all have so much that we can offer. I think that the Northern Territory is the most beautiful land in this country and obviously across the world. And I personally feel so privileged to have the ability to live here and know that I, myself, and all of us sitting in this room have so much to offer. So please, as you go forth in the future, continue to be open, be brave, and be brilliant. And just a final note, sometimes life doesn't go according to plan, and please know very genuinely, as someone who has done a lot of work within the emergency departments at Katherine District Hospital and Royal Darwin Hospital, that there are people to support you for when things aren't necessarily going to plan. And I think that one of the most wonderful aspects of our Australian healthcare system, which I talked a lot about when I was working overseas in the NHS, was that through primary healthcare we have access to mental health care plans and engagement with psychologists. And I think that this is something that more people in the Australian community should know about, and something that I would encourage you to access or tell your family and friends about at times of need. So thank you very much.
We've got 5 minutes now. I know we're having a big live Q&A panel at the end, but we'd love anyone that has a question for Dr. Cox to pop their hand up now, and I'll come around with the mic. Don't be shy. Okay, excellent. What would you like to ask?
Thanks, Dr. Cox. Amazing discussion. Would you share with us some more of your findings from Maningrida? Because, I mean, that's really close to home, and you spent such a big program. What did you find?
Yeah, look, I didn't want to wow you with graphs and scientific figures, but now that you've asked the question, yeah, so we haven't formally published the findings from our study yet, but am very keen to talk about it as we prepare for the publication of what would be the official manuscript. So overall, the prevalence of scabies last November in Maningrida was 25%, and more than 50% of community residents, 51.1% to be exact, had at least one form of skin disease. And this is the most common 5 or 6 skin conditions. And I guess what this really speaks to me is, one, the importance of doing this work, because I think it's very different for me to say the prevalence of skin disease is really high, as opposed to actually being able to give you that specific figure. And I really hope that that will give us the opportunity, as I said before, to gather support at the intersection of clinical research, academic, non-government organisations, and ultimately advocacy to government for increased funding and support around skin disease. And I think also what it highlights is the importance of a holistic approach involving the primary healthcare system, tertiary healthcare system, including lots of different specialist doctors, and ultimately increasing the service provision for dermatology in the Northern Territory and across Northern Australia. But more importantly, engaging with lots of different healthcare workers across the healthcare system to work towards a holistic and targeted approach, specifically involving local Aboriginal healthcare workers.
Thank you so much for answering that for us. We've got another one over here. Excuse me.
Thank you so much for your work. It's amazing. With scabies and other mites, one of the major things are actually hygiene, in my opinion, and having washing, water, running water, and washing machines, and steam ironing and stuff like that. So is this part of your treatment plan as well?
Yeah, look, that's an excellent question. And I think ultimately what we are working towards is well, when we think about the social determinants of health, we think about education, housing, and healthcare. And I guess my work sits within the healthcare arm of that. And we know from doing my research that skin disease continues to be a big problem, and there's a really high prevalence in Northern Australia. But we also know that in the context of research and changes to national clinical guidelines, like I mentioned about the use of ivermectin, that we have better and improved strategies to target skin disease and scabies and mite infestations from a medical perspective. But that is not recognising the overall importance of healthcare, of education and housing. And so, again, when I talk about a holistic approach, I agree it needs to include washing strategies, again with a medical flavour, but it really starts at healthcare and housing and education, and looking at the healthcare system from a much more holistic perspective, and that being part of our primary prevention strategy.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cox. A couple more in the front here.
Coming from an education perspective, I found that really an inspiring talk. And the theme of be open and be brilliant and be brave, probably in different order, because I just lost my notes. I want to know, do you get out to schools? Are you able to have these conversations with students? We need our secondary students to hear about your journey, because this is about their futures as well. And you're such a brilliant advocate for that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, look, it's been a tough couple of years, hasn't it? I don't think really anyone's got out since the beginning of COVID. And, me personally, I effectively came back to Australia at the beginning of COVID. And so it feels like almost this year has really been the first year that we've kind of been getting back to normal. But I agree. I think it's important that, I mean, someone such as myself, sure, but I think that there are lots of different opportunities for high school students who are in the territory to be inspired and educated about different opportunities. First of all, to motivate and inspire them to think about different options, but also to make sure that they stay locally and stay in the territory. And I think I say that as someone who grew up in Adelaide and actively made the choice to leave Adelaide and come here. And I think that I personally would be very open in talking about the reasons why I did that. But of course, ultimately, I really do believe in the territory healthcare system, and for me, I can't think of any more rewarding place to work anywhere in the world. And I really do believe that we can work towards a future where skin disease, not 1 in 2 people in a remote Aboriginal community have skin disease. So yes, whether it's myself and other individuals, I have previously spoken in schools about my journey, and I would be very happy to again.
Thanks, Dr. Cox. That was amazing. I'm actually a director on the Groote Eylandt Aboriginal Trust, and we have introduced 2 of the remote laundries. And obviously before that, a lot of the evidence we had before us was the social determinants of health, one of them being absolutely health and hygiene. And we've seen a remarkable, and I know that you've had some involvement in this, but we've seen just remarkable things for the community where it's built pride, it's built an understanding, not just of through the remote laundries and you know, washing their clothes and those sorts of things, but it's been a whole community environment, and it's become like a town hall. And so there's conversations about health and hygiene and you know, how we can increase that. But it's such a wonderful strategy that could be rolled out, like, you know, right across all of the remote communities. And Barunga was the first one, obviously, and we hold now, well, there's one going into Umbercumber as we speak. So just minor things like that in terms of washing your clothes with the right chemicals and things has been absolutely amazing. And I'm just wondering, is that part of the raft of strategies that are being implemented?
Yeah, look, I'd say that it's not a minor thing, it's actually a really major thing. Yeah, definitely. I think, and I have limited in awareness and involvement with the AIG laundry in Barunga, and I was actually involved with the Healthy Skin, Healthy Heart screening program at the Barunga Festival earlier this year, a couple of months ago. But again, I think this really speaks to the fact that I'm just one of many individuals working as part of the healthcare system, and obviously my lens is specifically from a specialist skin perspective, but I really see my role more in terms of advocacy and leadership, in terms of coordinating all of the people and resources and everything that goes into this holistic, targeted public health response. And the laundries are very much an essential component of that, not only when considering from a medical perspective the opportunity to, you know, wash sheets for at least 10 minutes on a 60-degree heat in order to kill the mites. Yes, but also, and you kind of touched on this, I think, but there is, and we know that this exists particularly with skin disease, but there is a degree of shame and stigma that we sometimes, it's sometimes really difficult to talk about. And I think this is really important specifically for skin disease because it's very visible. You can see skin disease on the skin. You know, that's really obvious to say, but you can't see kidney disease or heart disease necessarily in the same way. And again, I think this just really speaks to the opportunity to address the high prevalence of skin disease, but also to motivate us to think about public health in a much more holistic sense, of which education and housing and and washing and in working in collaboration, in conjunction with the laundries is an essential component.
Thank you.
Please, another round of applause for Dr. Victoria Cox. Thank you so much.